Oh, good morning, everybody. I'm David Ignatius. I'm a columnist for the Washington Post. I have been writing about the Middle East for 45 years, which certainly feels like a lifetime, almost is. I'm joined this morning by my friend Ayman al-Safadi, who is the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Jordan, who's been studying and anguishing over this similar length of time. So this morning we're going to have a very interactive town hall session in which all of you and your views will be central to how we're going to explore this. This is an off-the-record session. There are no reporting press invited, so people should feel free to really say what's on their mind. We're going to be talking about an agonizing subject that we've all lived through now for more than a year, the wars in the Middle East that began on October 7 with the Hamas invasion of Israel, Israel's response in Gaza and Lebanon, and then the other events that have happened in Syria, Iran, the whole region. We're going to touch on each of those. We're going to do this amazingly. You hear sometimes on quiz shows about a lightning round. We're going to do this in 30 minutes. We were originally going to have another panelist, and we decided, okay, we just have just the two of us, so we'll do it in 30 minutes. At the end, we'll have some time for everybody to make wrap-up comments, but in each of these sessions, we have 3 segments. We're going to pose a question. We'll ask you, using your devices, to register what you think. They're simple questions, but they go right to the heart of where we are in the Middle East. As we're digesting those numbers, I'm going to turn to my friend Ayman and ask him to just think through with us the basic issues involved in each. And then we'll take 5 minutes to go around the room, hear from you. Obviously, keep your comments as short as possible. If anybody wants to communicate, we have online as well as in this room. It's hashtag WEF25, and we'd invite people to send their comments through social media. So let's jump in with our first question. As we all watched, last week we had finally the announcement of a 42-day ceasefire in Gaza with the expected release of 33 Israeli hostages and nearly 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. That got underway Sunday with the release of the first 3 Israelis and Monday with the release of the first set of prisoners. But already there's a lot of anxiety about whether this will hold, whether it will move into the anticipated second stage where you'll have release of additional hostages and prisoners, and we'll begin to move towards some stable governance in Gaza in theory. So the first question that we want to ask you is, will the ceasefire in Gaza that was announced last week after all the efforts of the U.S. and other governments involved, will that hold? As people make their votes, I'm going to turn to Ayman and put that question to you, Ayman. Do you think the ceasefire process will hold and move through the different 3 phases towards a stable system of governance for Gaza, or do you have concerns about it?
Good morning, David, and thank you for having me. Good morning to all of you. Look, I think it should. And I think everybody has an interest in the ceasefire holding. It took a lot of hard work for the ceasefire to materialize. We've seen the first 2-3 days holding, and we've seen the impact on both Palestinians and Israelis, this sense of relief that has even went beyond Gaza and Israel into the whole region and indeed the world. So the deal, again, has been very, very articulately made. Question remains about the willingness of the parties. I think with all of us coming together, pushing for the right thing, and also thinking beyond the ceasefire into really what will happen next. I think that is going to be a very, very important component of how we go forward. The first few days, obviously the first stage was very well, I think, implemented. Now, as we go to stage 2 and stage 3, that is when some of the harder questions will start emerging about the repositioning of Israeli troops, the entry of aid and all of that. And I think if we maintain the resilience with which we all collectively approached the last minute of the negotiations to get the ceasefire in place, I think we have a shot at that. Obviously, the new administration, President Trump has made sure he wanted the ceasefire to happen, and I think we all know it's no secret that the intervention by his Middle East envoy, Mr. Witkoff, played a major role in that. So I think we have an opportunity here, and I think we need to do everything we can to sustain it.
Before I turn to the audience, I want to ask you one more question, Ayman, and that is, what's your biggest worry about this process? What's the thing that you think could, in fact, derail it and prevent movement toward success?
I think there are going to be some issues pertaining to the later stages of the ceasefire. I think when it comes to the keys, the exchange, I think it can be solved. But there are some strategic issues pertaining to where Israel would be, where Israeli troops would be, who's going to be in charge of Gaza after that, what kind of mechanisms we put in place to make sure that the Palestinians do not suffer again, and Israel also feels that there's going to be no security threat. And that's why it's not just up to the two parties. I think it is clear, and as you said, you've been writing about this conflict for decades now. Unless all of us come together, left to their own, the parties are not going to do it. So we need leadership, we need everybody to work on it, and we need to have clarity on where we go from here. And I think that is the question that all of us need to be addressing. How do we make sure that what happened on and since October 7th doesn't happen again? And for that, yes, you do need some hard security measures, but you need a political vision, which unfortunately remains to be absent.
It needs to be articulated. So I'm looking at the board, and I'm seeing that our audience is pretty negative. So I want to turn to you. If you'd raise your hands, keep your comments short, because we have only, 4 or 5 minutes for this segment. So if anybody would like to explain, yes.
Good morning. Your Excellency, you expressed a statement saying that we need to make sure we need to know where we are going from here. And the question is, do we know this? Thank you.
Other thoughts around the room? Ayman, what do you think?
I think we all know what we need to do. The question is, we're not short on ideas, we're short on will. As for how do we go forward to ensure a solution that will sustain the rights of, fulfill the rights of the Palestinian people and address Israel's legitimate concern, it is there. The two-state solution, where a viable Palestinian state would live in peace and security side by side in Israel, that is secure, that is accepted, that's normalized by the whole region. This is the only way to go forward. And I'm not just saying that as a sort of a conceptualization of an idea, but look at the history of the conflict. We cannot keep doing the same thing and expect different reaction. In the past decades, we just kept focusing on security, security, security without offering a vision, offering a future. And the result is we find ourselves in some sort of a violent cycles every few years. It happens again. So how do we make sure it doesn't happen? We need a solution that, again, fulfills the rights of the Palestinians, assure them that they will live safe, secure, dignified in their own state, and also assures Israel that it will be safe, accepted, and there'll be no threat to its security. And I think all of us in the Arab world, and I think a lot of our friends in Europe, in the region, in the US, we all want to have that solution. We all agree that the two-state solution is the only way to go forward. If it is not, then what is the solution? We're willing to listen, because you cannot just keep saying no to the two-state solution without putting something on the table. I think if Gaza taught us anything, if what's happening in the West Bank is teaching us anything, is that you cannot just continue to move forward without any political horizon that would make people feel that they have a future. So yes, there's a solution, but the will is not there yet, unfortunately.
Madam.
Hi, Kimberly Washington from California. There was a statement that was made by our newly appointed President Trump that Gaza is a demolition just completely destroyed, that it is not our war, and we will not interfere. However, our government continues to send weapons to support Israel in fighting. I just have deep concerns. The amount of children whose lives have been lost, and women, and from an American's perspective, we look at these people as human beings, and there is very little support for the children. These are children now without schools, without many without homes, without parents. What is the concern and the focus and the future for these children that have lost everything?
So I think that, focusing on the basic humanitarian needs is central in this next period. Martin, what do you think?
Martin, sorry, just to flesh out your answer, you said two-state solution. What would be the nature of the government of Palestine? I mean, how would it be administered? Who would administer it? Would it be an Arab coalition that administered it? What would be the nature of the government? And what role, what would happen to Hamas? And where would Hamas leadership be?
Talking about Gaza or the whole?
Well, I'm talking principally about Gaza, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So,
First, on your question, I think we agree with the President's assessment. Gaza is a wasteland. I mean, the amount of death and destruction and suffering that has been brought to Gaza over the past years is beyond human comprehension. And I think the world now, as the ceasefire holds and the international media is allowed to go into Gaza and report from the ground, I think the whole world will be shocked at the amount of suffering and damage that has been brought on Gaza. So I think now, and yes, children have suffered, women have suffered. 70% of the victims of the war, 47,000 killed, are women and children. 17,000 kids are unaccompanied. An equal number has lost either an arm or a leg. And the trauma, living in shelters, over 1.9 million people displaced. So yes, it is a catastrophe. And I think in terms of priorities, I think priority number one is get the ceasefire to hold, make sure there's no return to military activity. Now we need to flood Gaza with humanitarian aid immediately so that we address people's immediate needs. And in Jordan, we're doing everything we possibly can to do that. And then after that, we got to start talking about reconstruction, about a political vision, about a longer-term sort of solution to the problem. But I think if somebody is living in Gaza now, a mother, a child, a father, I think what they want to make sure now that there's food on the table, that there's a shelter, that there's heat, that there's a school to go back to. All these are issues that have yet to be tackled, and I think the only way we can do that is we work collectively as an international community. On Gaza, sir, on the future of Gaza, again, now we have the ceasefire. Let's all make sure that it holds. Then, as I said, humanitarian assistance, and then we have to look at the broader system. Gaza and the West Bank has to be one entity. We believe that the PA should assume responsibility of Gaza. As the government of Palestine should have the exclusive decision on war and peace, so there should be no armed militias in Gaza. And I think all of us could work together then on what sort of measures are needed. We have to look at security. How do we make sure that there is enough security guarantees for the Palestinians in Gaza and for Israel as well? We have to look at rebuilding society. There's a collapse of civil order in Gaza now. How do we rebuild it? And I think you need all of us to come together. There's been ideas on how to go forward. We did offer ideas in Jordan as far as March. The Arab group has offered a comprehensive initiative that would address the conflict in its entirety. And look, we as Arab countries, we've said since 2002 that in the context of peace, on the basis of the two-state solution, we're all willing to come together and make sure that Israel's security is guaranteed. And we can be creative into how to do that. But we need that context of peace. We need to restore hope. I think the Arab Peace Initiative speaks on behalf of all Arab countries, and it was endorsed by the Organization of Islamic Conference, 57 nations as well. So all of us are ready. And in the context of that peace, we are willing to sit on the table and work together with all our partners and with Israel on how do we come up with some sort of architecture that makes sure that all legitimate concerns by all parties are on the table and addressed effectively and efficiently.
Let's take a few more comments before we need to move on to the next subject. Mr. Minister, go ahead, please.
Thank you, David. Espen Barth Eide, I'm the Norwegian Foreign Minister, working a lot with Ayman on these issues. I think the ceasefire will hold in the short run for one reason and one reason only, which is that this gradual release of hostages and prisoners creates a societal pressure on those people who would actually like to break the ceasefire, not to do it now. So that gives us some room, some space for maneuver. But Ayman is totally right that for this to hold over time, it has to be connected to a political process, and it has to be connected to a political process that connects the immediate to the long term. Because there are acute humanitarian needs in Gaza, but while we find the management of that right now, that has to point towards a reunification of Palestine on a revamp and upgraded PA rule, and that again needs to install the hope that there will be an end to the underlying conflict. And one of the very important things Ayman just said is that this cannot be only up to the parties any longer. This problem is too big for the world to leave solely to Israel and Palestine, which is why we have jointly established this global coalition to implement the two-state solution, which has a growing group of membership from European countries, North America, Arab states, Global South, saying that we need to work together to offer a comprehensive regional package that can finally take us to the goal that was set out back in the late 40s, where there was the division of the British Mandate area, which was supposed to be a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. And we have one of these states. Now we have to get the other one, and that requires exactly that kind of joint effort. Absent that, we will just go back to a ceasefire, which will be the traditional Middle East ceasefire, will last for some months or some years, and then it all starts again and new hatred is created.
So let me see, before we move, if there are any other comments. I'm particularly interested, yes ma'am, the score up on the screen shows very negative news about whether this will hold. So if there are people who'd like to explain why they think this won't work, I'd be especially interested. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. My name's Marion Bergman. My question is there a strategy for leadership, and because I think there's a lack of leadership on the ground on both sides, trusted leadership that can talk to each other and actually implement all of this. So
let me, as moderator and somebody who's covered our now departed Secretary of State Antony Blinken very closely in the last 4 years. Secretary Blinken last week gave a very unusual speech. Secretaries of State often don't say everything that's on their mind. In this case, he said everything. And if you read the speech very carefully, he, for the first time, publicly stated precisely what the U.S. view about the day after should look like. And so just very briefly, you have this lawless area now in Gaza governed by gangs, as much as I can tell, with remnants of Hamas running around. Blinken describes a process in which the Palestinian Authority, based in Ramallah, would invite countries, and the countries who will be invited have been already contacted and appear to be ready, would invite them to participate in an international sort of format for governance in Gaza. And then you'd move into this transitional governance with international support, and the PA would, working with the U.S., train up a security force for Gaza. It's going to take a little while, but the U.S. has been thinking about this really for 20 years. This is not a new idea. So they would train them. They'd be trained partly in Jordan, as Ayman knows. And over time, this U.S. and internationally supported, U.S.-trained, vetted Palestinian security force would move into Gaza, take power away from gangs, and begin to have some real governance. That's the idea on paper. I don't need to tell the audience just how far we have to travel from that good idea from Secretary Blinken to reality. But that's the U.S. view. Whether President Trump shares it, I don't know. Sir, did you? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I wanted to talk about the day after and the future and what you're saying, and probably raising a case. I think we cannot compare cases, but the only successful case of nation building at the United Nations is East Timor. East Timor was devastated by the Indonesian army in the past. There was a lot of pressure for a number of countries for the UN to take this strong intervention. And Portugal, as former colonial power, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries paid the bill and actually built a nation like East Timor that now is a sovereign state. Can some of this be actually taken up as for the day after and for what you've just said about Blinken's ideas. And here is who should be the countries that actually did build East Timor in the case of the Palestine. Just wanted to say this.
So is there a last comment on this before we move on to the next subject? We can come, we have a little time at the end if something occurs to you. Yes, please. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Your Excellency. Thank you. My name is Diana Haloum. I'm a Palestinian delegate from the D50. I actually came from the West Bank. So I would say the ceasefire call has been needed for very, very long. And I think this should have happened since day one. I would say what concerns me the most is the West Bank currently as well. So since the ceasefire call and the hostage exchange deal, Israel has released 90 Palestinian prisoners, but since then has taken 60 from the West Bank, who many of them are under the age of 20. Ever since there's been airstrikes in Jenin. Today I get a call from my colleagues in the West Bank. Roads are closed, checkpoints everywhere. People cannot leave Ramallah or enter Ramallah. So my question for you is there a strategy in play with neighboring countries to also protect the West Bank? Because while we have all hands on Gaza, which is absolutely necessary, are we concerned also for the West Bank? Will we be at Davos next year having this conversation about the West Bank?
Great question. Why don't we wrap up this first portion with Ayman responding? I know you and His Majesty have worried deeply about the West Bank as the next crisis. Just give us a minute of thought about where the West Bank is heading.
Thank you. Before that, if I may, David, again, I think on Gaza, we cannot think short-term. Security approach alone will not solve the problem. If we want to be practical and forget politics, just ask the questions that are relevant to ensuring that whatever solution that is put on the table is going to work and deliver the objective. What is the objective? Is a Gaza at peace, the war ends, and then we have a political horizon for solving the problem. In order to do that, we do need a political vision. If we articulate that political vision, we can look at all kind of necessary steps to make sure that we move towards it, including, for instance, we could have a UN assistance mission. The PA will assume control over Gaza, but there's a lot of work to be done: reconstruction, rebuilding of institutions. The UN can help with that, and this will ensure that Gaza is part of the West Bank and part of what would be Palestine. But at the same time, the world is assured as well that there is others who are working and helping. And so there are lots of ideas. But I think, again, the key is, do we continue to think short term and just solve this problem only to face it again? Or do we really assess why are we here and what is it going to take to make sure that we're not here again? And my answer to that is a comprehensive solution that addresses the root cause of the problem, is that there is a Palestinian people out there that wants their freedom and state, and there is an Israel out there as well that is going to remain in the region, and we need to figure out a way for the two peoples to live together. None of them is leaving. So I think, again, but to my dear friend's point, is that left to their own, they will not solve it. This is a problem of global implications. We've seen the whole world dragged into this conflict. So I think it's upon all of us to agree on a solution and then force that solution. To the extent that we can, because other than that, we'll find ourselves here in 2-3 years. The West Bank has been on our radar from day one. As you know, we have a tremendous interest in the West Bank. It is on our border. If it could destabilize the whole region. And again, we've been working very, very hard, including directly with the Israelis, with our American friends, with our European friends, with the Palestinians, to make sure that the West Bank does not explode. Because if it does explode, then I think we'll be talking about even broader. There is a moment of opportunity in the region right now with all that's happening in Lebanon, Syria, the ceasefire, and I think we should not leave the fate of the future of the region to some radicals, some short-termists, some ideologically driven individuals and parties who just do not see beyond the moment. I think maintaining the security of the West Bank, making sure that the West Bank does not explode, is something of top priority, and it is dangerous what's happening there. And I think the whole world needs to take a deep look at what's happening. And again, with the same, I would say, vigor that we're looking at the ceasefire, we should also be working to prevent an explosion on the West Bank.
So I want to turn now to our second set of questions. And we're now going to focus on the other conflicts in the Middle East, or some of them, starting with Lebanon. So the first question is the ceasefire in Lebanon that was negotiated by the United States and France, which calls for the Lebanese armed forces to move into the areas that are being vacated by Israeli troops in the south in place of Hezbollah. Is that process working? I'm delighted to see 100% of the people think it's working. That's good. But we'll watch as other people register their votes. We have a second question that maybe we can post at the same time. I'll leave that to our technical folks. Turning to Syria, where Bashar al-Assad fled the country, HTS, headed by a man who called himself Jolani, has been trying to form a government. And the goal in Syria is really to reconstruct the Syrian state, which has been in fragments. And so the question is, in the next 5 years, as Jolani tries to create a government, hopefully with international support, will we see a Syria that remains divided, remains in these little splinters, probably each supported by a different regional power, or will we see the country come back together less divided? Let me turn to Ayman on these two. Again, you've watched these with great attention. The long process, the Lebanese ceasefire. I remember when Prime Minister Mikati came to Amman, that's a moment where I thought, okay, this is really going to happen, and where we are now. And then your neighboring country in which you've been deeply involved and concerned, Syria, where you think that's going.
Thank you. I think I was in Lebanon just a few days ago, and I can tell you there's a tremendous amount of hope by the Lebanese people that they can move forward in a better way and address all the shortcomings of the past period. The ceasefire is pretty much holding. There are violations here and there, but in general, it is holding. And we have a new president now that has been elected, so that is a very, very important sign to stabilize institutions and reactivate institutions. A new prime minister has been designated. So I think all the stars are aligned in Lebanon for us to be able to move forward in the right direction. The Lebanese army is key to not only sustaining the ceasefire, but also to maintaining peace in Lebanon. Therefore, I think it's incumbent on all of us to support the Lebanese army, provide them with the tools they need to be able to do their job. We in Jordan have been doing that. Others in the region and beyond have been doing that as well. So I think what you see in Lebanon is a very, very significant change, not just in terms of the ceasefire, but in the internal political dynamics of the country. And I think people are justified to be hopeful as, again, the top posts are being filled now and people are just tired of the uncertainty with which they've been living for years. And I think we can be optimistic about Lebanon, and I share our colleagues' optimism. On Syria, look, I think, now, wow, the number went up. It started 50-50. So now it's 53-47, which really speaks to the, 50-50 now, which again is a reflection of how people see the situation, a degree of uncertainty because things keep changing every day. But look, I want to say this, is that all Syrians are unified and really celebrating the end of the previous regime. And that is something that is bringing people together. They've suffered a lot. They've paid a tremendous price. However, there are many challenges that remain. I think HTS, Mr. Shara, is saying the right thing. I saw him. I received his foreign minister in Jordan. To all the questions that all of us collectively are putting, they're providing the right answers. They want to build an all-inclusive Syria that is fair to all its citizens, regardless of race, sect. The question is going to be how this is going to be implemented on the ground. I think there is, again, a sense of unity in Syria in terms of wanting to rebuild their country on bases that are nothing similar to the previous one. We need to help. We need to encourage positive behavior. We hosted the Aqaba meeting, which probably was one of the few meetings where everybody was aligned. I mean, we did not, usually it takes agonizing hours, if not even days, to come up to a joint statement. That one, we're all in agreement. We want Syria to be stable, to be safe, its sovereignty respected, its people fairly represented, the rights of all Syrians protected. That's something on which we all agree. Syria projecting no threatening power to any of its neighbors, terrorism having no place in Syria. We all agree on that. So I think we need to continue to engage. We had a follow-up to Aqaba in Saudi Arabia. Now we're looking at another conference in France. So all of us are coming together to send the message. So on the ground, though, there are challenges, refugees that have not yet returned. And I'm talking to a lot of our colleagues. We're a country that hosts 1.3 million Syrians. And we're not in a hurry to push them back. Ultimately, they have to go back voluntarily to their country. But we have to invest in the environment that will be conducive for them to return. Because if you push them back now, with Syria not ready to take care of them, I think that will backfire. Terrorism, Daesh is rebuilding. They've acquired more weaponry from the stockpiles of the previous army, and there's a black market for arms now, so we're keeping an eye on that. A big challenge, obviously, is the Northeast, and I think that's something that we need to keep our eyes on, because if we don't approach it right, it could be a problem. What the Syrians are saying is that they want the Kurds to be part of the country, just like any other Syrian citizen, equal rights and equal representation. And I think that is good. That's the only way to go. So there are challenges there, but I think if the HTS is able to implement the political narrative that they're telling everybody, I think we're in a good place and Syria will be able to move forward.
So this is a town hall. Let's hear from all of you about what you think first about whether it's stabilizing, whether the ceasefire is working, what you're worried about, and then about Syria, whether this dream, Ayman put it well, of a country recreating itself is realistic. Who'd like to jump in on Lebanon and Syria? Yes, please.
Small question. One of the problems Lebanon faces that I see is basically the armament of Hezbollah. Do you believe that the Lebanese government will be able to disarm Hezbollah?
So I'm going to, rather than turn them back to Ayman, I want to gather a bunch of questions and comments, and we'll come back to you at the end. Yes, ma'am.
I know that people are very eager to live again. The only question is the Lebanese army able to buy arms? Would Europe and the US sell arms to the Lebanese army?
CENTCOM has, for 20 years had this vision of rearming the LAF. We'll see what kind of arms they get. Yes, sir.
I'm Jeremy Fleming, the UK. Thank you very much, Excellency. You asked for concerns. So two brief ones. Firstly, we've had no conversation about the risks and opportunities about the situation that Iran finds itself in today. I'd be very interested in a few thoughts on that.
That's our next question.
Okay.
So we'll turn to that in
Thank
detail.
you. And then secondly, whilst of course this is fundamentally about the security and well-being of people in the region, there are implications way beyond the region. If we look at the lessons from history, there will be a tide of radicalization that could affect stability of people movements, but also, of course, terrorism in Europe and beyond. So I'm wondering about the risks and concerns about that too.
I know that's a deep worry for Homeland Security people in the U.S., that we're at the beginning of a wave of real unrest. Yes, ma'am, and then sir.
Hello, so I'm Sharon. I'm a D50 from Israel, and we're talking here about the conflict in the Middle East and how we can achieve peace. And I think we can't continue this conversation without thinking about the youth in those countries. And I'm feeling right now that the education in all of the Middle East countries, including Israel, really educate the children and the young generation in those countries to hate each other. And I express a lot of hate nowadays, even during those conferences, against me. So I want to ask you, as the leader, as a leader in the Middle East, how you can guarantee to educate the young generation in those countries not to hate each other, to face in peace, to love each other, to think different from what we currently face and I'm facing as a youth in those countries.
And let me turn to the Norwegian Foreign Minister, and then we'll come back to Ayman for a few comments, and then Well,
I voted less divided because I was just in Syria this weekend and met with Al-Shara, formerly known as Al-Jolani, and as almost everybody has gone in over the last week, we are really impressed.
Yeah.
He is incredibly knowledgeable, very intelligent, a good partner to speak about, and he says all the things, and most of what he does, with a few exceptions, are the right things, and even correct some of the things that we thought was not so good. I think that's genuine. I also think that he has a thin layer of leadership, and it's a momentous task to unify that country. But I think as of now, 40 days or something after the fall of Assad, it is as good as it gets. And if the world community decides it will go wrong, we will probably be right. But if we try to give them a chance, I think it might actually go in the right direction. Will be good for Syrians, for Lebanese, for Jordanians, for Israelis and Palestinians, because that also is a geopolitical shift of major implications, including because it reduces the influence of hardliners in Iran in the region. So I vote for less divided, and I think I'm a moderate, cautious optimist on Syria.
As good as it gets. Ayman, last word on this?
Yeah, thank you. Again, I share my friend's assessment of the new administration in Syria, but again, remember, they've been there for almost only 40 plus days. They found themselves, facing this task of running a country that has been destroyed by years of war and again, a lot of destruction, a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty there. So they're saying all the right things. Let's be patient and let's help them. And I think Syria and the region deserve that we all come together and support with that. Look, your point is a very, very important point, and I've been warning for months now, is that the amount of hatred and dehumanization that we've seen emanating out of the Gaza war last year or so is a huge challenge with which all of us are going to have to grapple. How do we restore faith in peace? How do we restore faith among younger generation and on both sides of the divide, that they can live in peace together? That is something that we obviously want. And look, when there is hope, people can do that. Go back, those of us who were there during the signing of the Oslo Accord, of the Jordan-Israel Peace Treaty, in 1994, there was hope, and people were giving each other a chance, and they were engaging, and they were meeting at conferences, looking at trade, looking at all of that. So I think it is possible. What we need to do is to restore hope, and I think that is on all of us, because we cannot just bury our heads in the sand. There is a tremendous amount of hatred and dehumanization that have taken place. Long term, that's going to hurt everybody. How do we unlock that? I think we cannot just leave it to time. We need action on the ground. We need to convince young people that yes, you can live in peace and security. Both of you can have your rights fulfilled. Palestinians will have their freedom, dignity, statehood. Israelis will feel secure, accepted and normalized with. And then I believe, I think we all believe that people, whether in Palestine, in Israel, in the US, in Europe, Africa, anywhere, they just want to live in dignity. They want to live in freedom. They want to put food on the table, have future for their kids. So I think we can do that, but it's going to take leadership. It doesn't help when leaders come out and just call the others human animals or dehumanize them to the extent beyond which you cannot come back. All wars will have to end, and I think any responsible leadership will have to think of, when the war ends, how do we walk back from the narrative that we've instilled in people's hearts and minds? I think that's a challenge for all of us, and I think the only way to do it is to really restore hope and show people that there's a future in which they can live together with respect, with all their rights fulfilled, and that is something that we have to work on. Look, Hezbollah, I think there's a new era in Lebanon now. So many dynamics have changed. Now you have a president who's very well empowered. You have a prime minister who's forming a new government. You have a very assertive narrative by the leadership that the decision of war and peace is the exclusive domain of the government, that nobody should have arms outside the army and state institutions. It's going to be a process, but I think it can happen because so many things have changed. And again, the Lebanese people are, to the extent that we can all assess, are behind this new sort of beginning for Lebanon, and realities on the ground have changed. So that's something that we have to look at.
Do you expect the Lebanese army to go back to the south?
It is.
They don't have the proper arms. Do you think that poor soldiers
we need, and I think there's been a lot of work even before the ceasefire was achieved on supporting the Lebanese army to the extent that it does its job. Not just, by the way, in the south. Now they have to.
They have all their borders.
as well.
I do know that there's a lot of really good thinking going on about this.
In Jordan,
So I want to. We have
some,
one more question that I want to get to before our session. We have gone 45 minutes, not a half hour, and that's one that overarches all these other issues, and that is the tension between Iran and Israel, and fundamentally the United States. So the question is, what evolution do you expect in relations between the new U.S. administration and Iran? We heard President Trump in his inauguration speech say he wants to be the president who ends wars and doesn't start new ones. At the same time, I've been hearing for weeks that there's been discussion between Israel and Trump's closest colleagues and Trump himself at Mar-a-Lago about the possibility of early Israeli action to strike at the Iranian nuclear program at a time of maximum Iranian vulnerability. So do people expect worsened relations, better relations, the same? And what I'm seeing is 53% believing relations will get worse. I think I probably would lean that way myself. Who has thoughts about this sort of fundamental fault line in the region with Iran and the West? Yes, Kathy.
The Saudi-U.S. relationship, which is very strong in really generating some kind of a game-changing injection of a new dynamic into the region. Because I think Martin has pointed out really well that there's an incredible vacuum in terms of governance, and the hatred, given the hatred that exists already, we already see symbolism of Hamas in the streets, over the past day or so. The social media is extremely active and really very powerful in the Hamas actually hierarchy. So I think you've got you don't have a lot of time in order to make sure the ceasefire takes place without putting some very strong dynamic power into the discussion.
Yes, Martin.
What you just said about we've all got to get together and fight. What it needs is strong leadership. And just to have this point, the strongest leadership that came before October the 7th, in fact, October the 7th may have been a reaction to it, was Saudi normalization with Israel. And I think the key point, we hear wonderful words, but actions speak louder than words, and there has to be a motive force. And it's the same in connection with Iran. And the Saudis' activity is related to that issue too.
So is there anybody here who thinks that President Trump, ambitious, my friend Rahm Emanuel wrote last week that his real dream now that he's gotten elected president again is to win the Nobel Peace Prize, that he might have in mind the very biggest deal, which would be a deal with Iran that would alter this story we've been watching since 1979. Anybody here who thinks that's in Trump's vision? I'm just curious.
Personally, I believe the biggest deal for Trump is to have the Abraham Accord.
Yes.
That's the biggest deal.
With Saudi Arabia.
With Saudi Arabia, exactly.
He seemed to be leaning that way, I thought, in his comments yesterday. Any other thoughts about, there's also a chance, yes, sir.
I actually think that if Trump wants to explore the possibility of some sort of negotiation or end diplomatic solution with Iran, if Iran enters into that and is willing to go there, that will drive a wedge between the United States and Israel. And from the Iranian perspective, that's a legitimate goal. From Trump's perspective, he will even explore the possibility of some sort of diplomatic solution. Even if it doesn't develop into that, it will create a major, major crisis between Israel and the United States.
That's a fascinating point. Other thoughts about that? Yes, sir.
I beg to differ with him.
Please.
Israel is not going to fight it. If the United States decides to do a deal with Iran, Israel will follow.
This is a moment, I've heard my Israeli friends say that after the operations in October, Iran is almost naked to attack. Its air defenses, at least around Tehran, have been crippled. There will not be a moment like this. This window will be maybe 2 years. There won't be a moment like this again. So why not take advantage of it? That's how the argument goes. And I think that's why there's some anxiety that we're heading toward a possible period of direct Israeli-Iranian conflict aided by the United States. Ron Dermer visited Mar-a-Lago 3 times after the election, Ron Dermer being the closest advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu. What did he go to talk about? Well, I have a guess. Saudi deal was part of it, but I think...
That's what he went to talk about, not about... Israel does not have the ability to take out the Iranians' nuclear facilities. Only the United States has it.
Do you think that's... So, okay, that's it. Any other comments before we go to Ayman? So I'm getting the end. This is like like a hangman's noose. That means, Ayman, you have 1 minute before I get thrown out.
We don't have enough time to go over such deep and complicated issues in 1 minute, but I would say the following is like, Saudi is playing a very key positive role in trying to bring about comprehensive peace to the region, not just in relation to Palestine-Israeli conflict, but also to the whole other dynamics in the region. And we work very, very closely together, and I think they will continue to play that positive and constructive role. The president said he wants to be a unifier and a peacemaker, President Trump, and we believe he could do what probably others couldn't have done in the past. He could bring about the peace that has eluded us for many decades now. And in us, he has a partner because we are aligned that bringing about that comprehensive peace is in the interest of everybody. So we're willing to work. We're going to work with the new administration, offer solutions, be extremely positive, and hopefully President Trump will deliver what others could not deliver over decades of conflict. So, but we have to, all of us, engage and come together and again start from the end. What is it that we want that will bring about the comprehensive peace that we all deserve and need in our part of the region? So we need to have honest arguments, put everything on the table, and just see how we can move towards that. Look, with Iran, we suffered a lot when Iran fired its missiles. I mean, a lot of them fell in Jordan. More Jordanians were hurt than Israelis actually in the last round of attacks because we're obviously we're the root there. So we have an interest in making sure this doesn't happen again. And I think to Iran, in all our engagements with them, we've been very, very unequivocal. Look, we all want to live in peace in the region on the basis of non-intervention in the affairs of other, in terms of respect for the other. And we told them to get there are real issues which we have to put on the table. You cannot just put it under the carpet and move forward. So we do have issues with Iran that need to be settled. But on Israel-Iran dimension, what I would say is what His Majesty has been saying for years now. If you solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, then what logic would Iran have to come and say, I want to pick a fight with Israel or have this and that with Israel? If you take the argument away from them, then the whole region is going to be looking at what Iran is doing, in other parts of the world. And that argument will not be there anymore. So I think, again, it all comes back to solving the essential issue in the region, which is bringing about Palestinian-Israeli peace. And that would open the door for full peace in the region. That will benefit everybody. And I think status quo politics that prevailed for a long time before October 7 cannot come back again. I think, again, I say there is a tremendous opportunity now for us to move forward in the right direction, but it takes leadership, it takes solution, and I think we do need the very active role of the U.S. and other friends in Europe and elsewhere.
That's a perfect way, I think, to end this session. I just make one brief comment in summary. I sense a split between our hearts and our heads. Almost everyone has expressed a version of optimism and hope about the developments in the Middle East. And yet, when we had to vote about whether we think, ceasefires will hold and progress, there was a pretty pessimistic view. So, we'll resolve that over time. Thank you so much for coming to this interactive town hall. Thank you, Ayman.
Thank you.